Zoom recording. Okay, so we're gonna start. Let's see, we're starting here. Oh yes, with the Mishnah. Hakorei b'Torah lo yivchot mishlosha psukim. So when you wonder, somebody who reads from the Torah you have to read at least the reader has to read at least 3 verses. And when it's being translated, he should not translate. He should not read to the translator more than 1 verse at a time. So if there's a translator there who is, which is their version of what we have with a Chumash, then you have to go slowly so that people can, hear the translator read the verse by verse. Now here they say so it won't be so the translator will not become confused, right? So he's needing to he's translating in real time. But otherwise, you have to read the reader has to read at least 3 verses, and that's the what we do today. We saw this before, that the minimum number of verses for a section is 10, but each that's at least 3 verses for each reader. Uvanavi shlosha. So, but in the case of with the Haftarah from the prophetic section, one can read 3 verses at a time, and then to allow the translator can then translate a larger amount of material. And the concern here, as Steinsaltz points out, is that with the prophets, it's not halakha that we have with in that material. And so therefore, if the translator kind of gets the gist of the 3 verses, that's fine. But when it comes to Torah, he says, because might lead to an error in practice. Obviously, not all of Torah is halakha, but I think it's also greater respect for the Torah. You want Torah comes directly from God, and therefore we want to make sure that each word is heard correctly in the translation, or is translated as close to literal as possible. However, it says here, Hayu shloshtan shalosh parshiot korin echad ve'echad. And we'll get to an example of that in the Gemara, where if the 3 verses are 3 distinct paragraphs, where there are 3 separate subjects, or they're broken up in the scroll itself is into 3 portions, individualized portions, then you have to read it separately and then translate verse by verse. I think here the idea is that when it comes to the prophets, and we'll see in this next passage, you have to the context has to be the same. You don't want to skip into different topics. As long as if you're translating and you have 3 different verses that seem to speak of different topics or different prophecies, you have to do it one at a time. You can't throw them all together. Midalgim ben Navi, we're permitted to skip from one place to another in the prophetic sections, which we do when we read Haftarot. It's not uncommon. Just recently we had where we skipped a couple of what was it? We skipped. I don't remember what the wasn't Ezekiel, was it Hosea? Oh, it was from Hosea, I think, where we skipped from chapter 7 and then we went into chapter 9. And we also on Shabbat Shuvah, we do the same thing. We even skip books with in the prophetic section, which you're permitted to do as long as you're in the what we call the Treyasar, the smaller books of prophets. You can't skip from Isaiah to Hosea, but you can skip within on Shabbat Shuvah. We skip from Hosea to Joel or to Micha. You're not allowed to. However, when it comes to Torah, ein midalgin, you can't skip passages in the Torah. We'll find out there's an exception to that. Ve'ad kama hu midaleg, how far can you skip? Ad kadei shelo yifsok hamiturgaman. Um, you can you don't want to burden the congregation by by skipping so far that the translator is done with his translation and you're still looking and rolling the Torah scroll. Um, so it and remember the prophetic sections were also written on scrolls. So just like the Torah scroll, today we have all 5 books on one scroll. Once upon a time, actually each book was a separate book on a scroll, and the same thing with the prophets. Today, all 5 books are on one scroll, and there are places I know that when I was in Jerusalem years ago, there were places that read from the Haftarot on a scroll. So that's still done today in some places. And there too, you can't skip to a new scroll. All right, so now we get to the Gemara. Hane shlosha psukim keneged mi. Okay, so what's the significance of the 3 verses? What do they correspond to? Amar Rav Asi keneged Torah Nevi'im Ketuvim, so the 3 sections of the Bible. V'lo yikra lemeturgaman yoter mipasuk echad uvenavi shlosha psukim ve'im hayu shloshtan shalosh parshiyot korei echad. Okay, so here this is the Mishnah that we're reading again, but here's an example of what they're talking about when you have 3 verses that constitute 3 separate paragraphs, and it's found in Isaiah, and it's one of the I forgot. Is it for A? It's one of the 7 parshiot of consolation that comes in between Tisha B'Av and Rosh Hashanah. We read from Isaiah 52, and it says, so there's one verse that says, "For thus says the Lord, you were sold for nothing." And then another verse starts again, "For thus says the Lord." See, it's a separate speaking of the Lord. "At first my people went down to Egypt." And then a third section, "Now therefore what have I here, says the Lord." So it's 3 adjacent verses, but each one is an independent paragraph. So that, in an example like that, you can't, the reader reads each one separately, allowing the translator to translate each section. Because they're different topics and they're different paragraphs. Okay, now we're back to the Mishnah. Midalgin b'navi ve'ein midalgin b'Torah. So you said you can skip in the among the reading of the prophets, but not from the Torah. But we have a contradiction here, because we know in Tractate Yoma, the high priest would read the section that we read today, Acharei Mot, which is next week's Torah. Not next week's Torah, but the next time we read from the Parsha, it's the next Parsha that we read, Acharei Mot, chapter 16 in Leviticus. And he also would read from chapter 23. So after he finishes the Acharei Mot portion for Yom Kippur, he jumps ahead to, which is basically what we read today, is the Maftir portion. So wait a minute, here he's switching, he's jumping from place to place. So Abai's solution is lo kashya, kan bichdei sheyifsok haturgaman, v'kan bichdei shelo yifsok haturgaman. They're very close. They're about, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 columns apart from each other. You can get from the end of the Acharei Mot portion to chapter 23 by the time the Meturgaman is finishing the translation of that last verse in Acharei Mot. So it's not such a big deal. Now, we do that today. We continue to, the only time that we do that I can think of, we do that today, because on Yom Kippur for us today, that chapter 23 is the Maftir. So that comes from a totally different Torah scroll. We finish the Torah reading, we say Chatzi Kaddish, and then we bring Torah scroll number 2. But there is an example of this during the year on fast days, where we read from chapter 32, verse 11, and we have 2 of the 3 parts of that fast day reading. And then for the third Aliyah, we jump ahead to chapter 34. And we conclude the reading. So there's a little bit, there's like one column we jump one column to finish the Torah reading. So there is some skipping even today. V'ha ala katane midalgin b'navi ve'ein midalgin b'Torah ve'ad kama hu midaleg ad kedei shelo yifsok hamiturgaman miklal de b'Torah klal lo. As far as he can, provided the translator will not conclude his translation before the reader is ready to continue reading. This applies to the reading of the prophets. It therefore proves by inference that while reading the Torah, one may not skip at all. Because the assumption here, the Gemara is making the assumption when it says how far may one skip, it's referring to the prophets where it says you can skip. But it sounds like the Torah, it's an automatic. There's no skipping at all. So what do you mean? How far you can? That up here, Abai said, "Oh well, you can skip as far as long as the translator doesn't have to pause after he finishes the translation." So then Abai offers a further explanation. Ella amar Abai lo kasha, not a problem. Kan be'inyan echad, kan b'shtei inyanot. So he says here, because they're dealing, you can skip the Torah reading if you can skip, if it's close enough that you're not allowing the translator to finish before you get to the next part, and if it's in the same idea, the same topic, which in this case above, the example above was it's all about Yom Kippur. And even today with a fast day, the opening reading is Moses asking God to forgive the people for their transgression. It's the golden calf incident. And then we skip ahead a chapter and we get to the conclusion of that story where Moses brings down the second set of tablets and God, and we read the 13 characteristics of God's compassion. So there it's all the same topic when you're skipping. But in a Baraita, it says that with the prophets, it can even be two distinct topics. Kan v'kan b'chdei shelo yifsok haturgaman. But in either case, whenever they're skipping done, you can't skip so much that the Meturgaman, the translator, is sitting there finished with his translation and the congregation's waiting for something to be read. Tanya Idach, there's another Baraita, Ein midalgin minavi lenavi. You can't skip from prophetic book to prophetic book. However, one may skip from one prophet to another among the Treyasar. That's the Shnei Masar, the 12 minor prophetic books. Let's see what he says here. He's give us all 12 of them. Yeah, here we go. Hosea, Joel, Amos, Ovadia, Yonah, Micha, Nahum, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. So they would all be written in one book. That also explains why sometimes we speak of the 24 books of the Bible, and people are like, wait a minute, 24 books? You got more than 24 books. Well, not if all of these prophets are considered one book. And they're on one scroll. So, let's see. Okay. Oh, the only thing is you can't do, it says here, according to this Baraita, Shelo yidaleg misofa sefer l'tchilato. You can't go backwards. So you can't skip from the end of the book and then go back to the beginning. You got to go in the order of the book. And again, the examples I'm thinking of, let's see, is there anyone where, I think the only one I can think of that we skip books is on Shabbat Shuvah, and then we are going in order. It's Hosea, and then either to Joel, which follows Hosea, or Micha, which also follows Hosea. Um, okay, next Mishnah. Hamaftir banavi hu pores al shma vehu over lifnei ateva vehu nosei et kapav ve'im hayakatan aviv or rabo ovrim al yado. Now, as I put in the notes, to understand this, we have to see that to getting the honor of the maftir at this time obviously was not considered a big honor. If I would compare it today, it's like in our congregation, it would be like reading the English prayers, the prayer for the country and the prayer for the state of Israel that we recite. It's in English, so you don't have to have that much skill. Well, you certainly don't need any Hebrew skill, and it's a short portion, and pretty much anybody can do it, and so it's not such a big honor. So if we were, if we're handing out honors and somebody got that, they might say, wait, this is all I'm getting? This is, I come to shul every week and you're just giving me this reading? So the same thing here, if a person's given the honor of the Haftarah, they would also allow them to recite the introductory prayers and blessing before the Shema. That's this Poreset al Shema, which Steinsaltz is explaining the way it had been done in the past. So basically, it's the Barchu, it's the Chatzi Kaddish and the Barchu, and those opening blessings, the blessing over creation and the blessing over Torah. Whereas modern scholars believe it has to do with the way the Shema was recited during this period, which was responsively. But whatever that Pores al Shema is, the person who would get the honor of the maftir would also do that, and they would lead the davening, the Shacharit service, the Shacharit service, and if they were a priest, they would get the honor of duchanim, doing the priestly blessing over the congregation. And in a case where the Haftarah is a minor, because a minor can recite the Haftarah, but he can't lead the prayers yet because he's not old enough. So in that case, his father or teacher would get those honors. All right. So then another teaching: Katan koreh b'Torah umitargem. So a minor can read the Torah in public. We saw that. Women can too, but in the case of women, it was considered the issue of kavod atzibur, the respect of the congregation, mitigated that possibility. But a minor male, obviously, that's not an issue because eventually he's going to grow into that position. So he can read Torah and he can translate it, but he can't lead. He can't do this Porei Sal Shema, which, again, if we understand it as Chatzi Kaddish and Barchu, which makes sense because you got to be a bar mitzvah to lead that, and you can't lead the Amidah. And if the kid was a priest, you wouldn't lead the priestly benediction. Now, I think what's interesting here is to try to figure out the principle involved in all of this. Because then we get to a pokeach, a person, not really clear how to translate pokeach. Steinsaltz gave us a note down here, a lot of different possibilities. Sometimes it may be someone who's not properly dressed. So if we were translating that into our world, a person comes in, I don't know, shorts and a t-shirt maybe, or parts of his body are exposed. So maybe it's, here he's wearing a sash around his hips and waist, not appropriate. Or according to another, his arms are exposed. That wasn't acceptable. Or bare, his shoulders are bare, or the chest is bare. Some understand as the legs are bare. He's wearing, really short shorts. Now, I think in the case, to some extent in our world, I think we would say that regarding a woman. If a woman got up there in really short, in a short dress, that just went over her behind, we might say that is not appropriate. So in any case, this idea of pokeach, somebody who's not dressed properly, either because they're exposing their limbs or they're dressed. Some translators are dressed in rags. Um, they still can do certain things. This is what's so interesting. They can lead the again, we'll understand it this way. They can lead the Chatzi Kaddish and the Baruch Hu in those first blessings before the Shema. They can translate the Torah into Aramaic, but they can't read the Torah, and they can't lead the Amidah or recite the priestly benediction. So the minor can read the Torah and translate, but can't lead the Shema section. The Mocheach can lead the Shema section, also translate the Torah, because that's considered a lesser issue, but can't read from the Torah and can't lead the davening. Okay, now we get to a blind person. A blind person can, according to the first opinion here, can recite the introductory prayers and the blessing before the Shema. So that's the Chatzi Kaddish, the Baruch Hu, the blessing over creation in Torah. And he may also translate the Torah into Aramaic, but obviously they're not allowed to read. We're pull from this that they can't read from Torah because they can't see it. And is that it? Those are the two things. Okay. But Rabbi Yehuda says he shouldn't even be able to recite that opening blessing about creation because he's never benefited from it. He's never seen the mi'orot, which is what we refer to in that creation blessing. We say Yotzer HaMi'orot, the one who creates the luminaries, the great lights. Well, if he's never seen it, how can he bless God for this gift? So that's his opinion. We'll get to that in the Gemara. All right. So now the Gemara goes back to this issue about leading. The issue of Haftarah. Okay. So why does the person who recites the Haftarah, why does he get all these other honors? What's the deal? So we have two opinions. Rav Papa says it's due to the desire to grant him honor. Again, Haftarah is not that big a deal. It's like doing the English readings for the state of Israel and America, and it's not a big deal. And person feels, it's no big deal. I'm insulted that you're giving me this. So therefore, we give you more honors. You can also lead the Torah service, to make you feel better. That's one possibility. Rav Bar Shimi Amar Mishum de'ate insuye. They're going to come in. They're going to quarrel. So it's a little about honors. So then the Gemara asks, as it often does, well, what's the practical difference between the two opinions? My banaihu, and the answer they give is the aved bechinam. So this is a little confusing to me. The difference is if you're not getting paid for any of these honors. So I guess, and Steinsaltz explained in a note, it was customary for those leading the prayer service to be paid for their services. So the way that I think this makes sense is it wasn't a fixed job. It wasn't like you had a cantor who always led services, because then why would there ever be a quarrel? The guy's that's his profession, that's his job. No, I think what it must be is that any week that somebody leads the service, it's like you get something, payment. Let's say in our world, whoever volunteers or whoever offers or gets the honor of leading the service, we give them a book, we give them a gift certificate of some kind. Well, the person who's got the Haftarah, which is, again, in this world, not such a big honor, will say, how come you didn't give me the opportunity to daven? I want that gift certificate, or I want the payment that comes with the davener. So therefore, that's what Rav Bar Shimi is suggesting, that if you don't give the Haftarah reader the honor of also davening, which comes with a monetary payment, some material benefit, that person, they're going to quarrel. They're going to say, I want that too. It's not enough to just read Haftarah. Whereas in the case where if nobody gets paid, it's all volunteer, then in that case, they're not going to be so upset because they're not going to quarrel because, okay, I might not like this honor, but I mean, it might not be a big deal, but I'm not losing out by allowing another person to get the honor of davening. Whereas in the case, yeah,
if no one's being paid,
mm-hmm.
then I'm a little surprised there's no discussion of the attitude that, well, we all take our turns at doing these things.
Well, right. Well, he's trying to explain the Gemara is just trying to explain why the difference between Rav Papa and Rabba Bar Shimi. So in Rav Papa's case, you would still have to give the Haftarah reader more honors because they would be considered, it's like no big deal. It's dishonoring me. You're just going to give me the Haftarah? Oh, well, in that case, you know what? We better make you feel better. We'll give you the davening as well.
It sounds like we have to balance the books.
Right, exactly. Sure. Right. So, we want to make you feel better. You took this position, you took this honor that's really nobody wants, or it's no big deal. Anybody can do it. So therefore, we give you a bigger honor leading the service. But in Rabba Bar Shimi's position, if in a case where nobody was getting paid, and everybody's doing it gratis, there really wouldn't be such a big argument over the person who's given the Haftarah. I mean, if that's the reason, is Rabba Bar Shimi's concern is they're going to quarrel, not that the Haftarah is not a big enough honor. Yeah, I mean, so right. If here, like if it's Sinai, the person who did the Haftarah, everybody does. I ask people to do these honors, and also by us, Haftarah is considered. You got to have some skills to do the Haftarah, so it's a pretty big honor. But if nobody's going to complain if, okay, so this one's doing the Haftarah and I'll do the davening, okay. But if there was a special gift that you got for davening, and then the person who Haftarah might say, well, let me do the davening too. Why am I not doing that? Why can't I get that, both of them? So I think that's what the issue is. Not that, because at first I was confused because I was like, if you're paying somebody regularly to lead the davening, why would people quarrel? I mean, you've hired a person to be the davener. But I don't think that's what we're talking about. I think we're talking about that it's a situation where people are paid when they're given the honor of davening. And in that case, the Haftarah person wants that honor too, because they want to get some payment. But if everybody's doing it for free, that's not a reason for quarreling. But then the Gemara tries to come up, well, wait, here's another possibility, to undermine that argument, to saying that it's another way of suggesting that Rabba Bar Shimi's argument doesn't really hold. Because if one who leads the Haftarah is a minor, then his father or the teacher get the other honors. Well, amrat mishum mitzuye. If you say that the person who's given the honor of the Haftarah is going to complain because they didn't get the bigger honors, or they're going to quarrel because maybe there's payment involved. For some reason, there are people going to quarrel over honors. Like, is a minor, is a 12-year-old kid going to get all upset because he can't lead the davening? He can't do it anyway. But that argument doesn't really work because elamai mishum kavod. Rather, what's the reason? It's due to honor. I mean, is a little kid going to be insulted? If we followed Rav Papa's, Rav Papa's argument. Is a little kid going to be insulted because he didn't get the honor of davening. I mean, he can't even do it. So why would he be insulted? Rather, according to Rav Papa, it's a display of honor to his father and his teacher. So Rav Papa would come back and say, wait a minute, yeah, well, the teacher would be insulted if the child did the Haftarah, and then you didn't offer to the teacher the honor of leading the congregation in prayer. Well, if you're going to use that argument, you could use the same Rabba Bar Shimi argument, which is maybe they'll quarrel and say, hey, if there's a benefit to doing the davening, how come I didn't get asked to do that? So, so that's that argument doesn't really hold. You can use either Rav Papa or Rabba Bar Shimi. You could still use one of their two. Their arguments are still strong. Okay, now we get to the next portion about the bocheach, this person whose limbs are exposed or they're not dressed properly. They're limited in what they can participate in. So Ula Barav raised a dilemma before Abaye. Katan pocheach mahu sheyikra b'Torah. Okay, so that's one thing about an adult, but a little kid, not a little kid, but a child who can do some things, right? They can read from the Torah in general. A lot of times a child dressed in lots of, we don't dress the child up. Maybe the child is coming with his limbs are exposed, right? He's wearing little shorts or something like that. He's not. We don't dress the kids up like we do adults. So can he still read Torah even if he has limbs exposed or his legs are exposed or whatever the pocheach issue is? Amarle v'tiba'i lach arum. He goes, well, if you're going to ask that, let's compare it to a naked. Let's say the kid, who again, isn't going to dress the way adults do. What if he were naked? What would you let a naked person, a naked child, come and read Torah? Arum my tamalo. Why wouldn't you let a naked child come up there and read? The answer is mishum kavod hatzibur. Hachanami mishum kavod hatzibur. So once again, we have this nebulous concept, kavod tzibur, the honor of the respect for the public. In this case, it's just as a person. The reason why a naked child could not read Torah, and when we say naked, let's see, does he say totally naked? It was only considered nakedness when it is fit for sexual. Therefore, the general prohibition against reading the Torah while unclothed does not apply to a minor. If he prohibited, oh, okay, so I guess the way the Gemara is thinking is that a naked 10-year-old, right? Even if you could see his private parts, it's a little kid. We don't make a big deal out of it, but you wouldn't let him read from Torah, right? I mean, we would say that's unacceptable. He might be able to run around town naked like that. Nobody'd say anything, but you don't let him come into the synagogue and read from the Torah. Why? Because it's not proper. It's not the kavod hatzibur. It's not respectful to the community. So too, a person who's not dressed, a little child who's not dressed properly, shouldn't read from the Torah due to respect for the public. So again, what's respectful? In our world, people come in people wear shorts, people wear jeans, t-shirts. I don't know. It's a tough call. People have sometimes asked about the way people are dressed when they lead services, but it's, again, if the determining factor is kavod tzibur, we are much more casual in our dress. I remember going to, even at my age, I remember when I would go to Sunday school, I dressed up. My mom dressed me up in my good clothes to go to Sunday school. Now you can't even get them to come to Sunday school, but you certainly wouldn't be upset if a child came to school dressed in t-shirts and jeans. Okay, next one. Summa pores al shma. So here's the restriction about a blind person. Again, they can do certain things, but they're not allowed to do other things. And Rav Yehuda's point was they don't benefit directly because they can't see. They can't see the light that comes from the sun and the moon. So how could they say that blessing with any integrity? So the response is, but it's taught in a Baraita, Harbeit Safu Lidrosh B'Merkava. There are people who have never seen the Merkava. This is the the chariot in Ezekiel's vision, and it was understood that this was a form of mystical speculation that some early rabbis engaged in, called Merkava mysticism, where they would imagine what the chariot and the heavens where God resides look like, and they would discuss it. So wait a minute, there are people who do Merkava mysticism who have never seen the Merkava. So why do you have to see the actual thing to say a blessing over it? The Rabbi Yehuda's response would be, notice this isn't Rabbi Yehuda, it's the Gemara on his behalf. They're saying, kind of for the sake of argument, they could say, well, hatam be'avanta de liba talia milta. Literally, the matter depends on the heart's comprehension, and one can concentrate his mind and understand. It's another way of saying we can speculate, right? This is what philosophy is all about. We speculate, we think about these things, and we discuss them, even though we may never have seen them. But it's the potential. But we're talking about, in this blessing, something very material. It's the benefit that one gets from seeing the sun and seeing the moon. Well, if you can't see, how you're not deriving that direct benefit, you're not seeing it. So then the response of the rabbis would be, but you know what? There's an indirect benefit. Itle hana'ah, there is benefit here, even if it's indirect. Ki Rabbi Yossi, the Tanya Amar Rabbi Yossi. For Rabbi Yossi taught, Kol yamai hayiti mitzte'er al mikra zeh, v'hayita mimashesh b'tzohraim kasher yimashesh ha'iver ba'afela. He said, I was always troubled by this verse. You shall grope at noon as the blind man gropes in the darkness. This is from one of the curses at the end of Deuteronomy. What happens if the Jewish people don't follow the Torah? That you'll grope in the afternoon, right? During the daytime, as a blind man gropes in the darkness. And he said, what does it matter to a blind person whether it's dark or light? They're going to grope in the darkness, or they'll grope at noon. What does that mean? What's the point of that? So what does it mean that they're groping in the darkness? They're always in darkness. Ad sheba ma'aseh liyadi, until something happened and I had an experience. Pama achat hayiti mihalech bi'ishon laila. I'm walking around in the middle of the night, ve'afelan, in this darkness. Ve'ra'iti suma shehaya mihalech b'derech ve'avuka b'yado. So he sees this blind man walking in the middle of the night with a torch in his hands. And what does the blind guy need a torch? He can't see in any case. And I said to him, my son, why do you need this torch if you're blind? And he said to me, Kol zman she'avuka biyadi, b'nei adam ro'im oti. Well, if I have the torch, people will see me, and they'll see that I'm blind, and they'll come to my rescue. They'll make sure that I don't walk into a pit or into a bush with lots of thorns in it. So even then, Steinsaltz finished up, even a blind man derives at least indirect benefit from the light, and therefore he may recite the blessing over the heavenly luminaries. We all benefit from the sun. We all benefit from the moonlight in some way. And so therefore, it's appropriate for the blind person to say these blessings. Okay, next Mishnah. Kohen sheyesh biyadav mumim lo yisa et kapav. A person who has deformed hands, blemishes on his hands, may not recite the priestly benediction. Because, that's the one that Spock, that's famous from Spock's, Leonard Nimoy, who was a Kohen, took the Kohanic hand signal for blessing and turned it into the blessing for, I forgot what Spock was, Vulcan. So there's a special hand signal that you give when you say the blessing. Not only that, but Rabbi Yehuda says that even a person whose hands were colored with satis, which I guess is woad, I didn't know what that was, dyer's woad, which is a blue dye, he also shouldn't say the benediction because, again, the congregation, mipnei sheha'am mistaklin bo, they're going to look at the hands and not focus on the blessing itself. They're going to be distracted because of the deformity or the colors on the weird coloration of the hands. So now we explain. The Gemara is going to explain. Tana mumim she'amrum bifanav yadav v'raglav. The blemishes here, we're not just talking about the hands. We're talking also about the face and the feet. Anywhere that you might be obvious to those in the congregation. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi said, if his hands are spotted with white blotches, also he can't say the benediction. The Gemara notes that this is also taught in a Baraita. If a priest's hands are spotted, he may not lift his hands. He can't say the priestly benediction. Or if his hands are curved inward or bent sideways. So it's this deformity. Now, let's see. The one that made the most sense to me was the Reed, who says it's not that it's the reason is because it is not respectful. No, sorry. Where was it? Well, maybe it was his first one. Most commentators explain the reason he cannot recite the priestly benediction is people will look at him. But where was the? Maybe here it is. Rashi explains that the reason is prohibited to look at the priest during the priestly benediction because the divine presence rests on their hands. However, Tosafot, that's Rashi's students, and other commentaries point out that this is true only in the temple. They explain, based on the Jerusalem Talmud, that the reason it is prohibited to look at the priest during the priestly benediction outside the temple is because one will be distracted from focusing on the blessings themselves. And based on that explanation, my understanding is there's no longer is this are these restrictions for a priestly individual upheld. Because, and we don't do, our congregation, we don't do duchenim, but in Israel or among Ashkenazim, it's usually on the festivals. Among the Sfardim, it's every day, I believe. There's the priestly benediction with the Kohanim. But in any case, the reason these restrictions are not upheld anymore is because today the custom is the congregation covers their face with the talis when the priests say the blessings, so that we can, one, focus on being blessed at that moment, but also I think it's because this is a very significant mystical moment, and if you're looking at the priest, it kind of undermines that sacredness, that mystical moment, the mysticism of the moment. If you're looking at it and you're just seeing a person standing there with their hands held out saying the blessing. But in any case, that's so that today we wouldn't restrict a person, a Kohen whose hands are discolored or something like that, because everybody's covered up. Now we get, here's some other restrictions on priests. If they don't pronounce the words appropriately. Amar Rav Asi, Haifani Uveishani, that is priests from Haifa and Beit Shan, that's northern Israel, Lo Yisad Kapav, they can't say the blessing. Tanya Nami Hachi, Ein Moridin Lifnei Teva, Lo anshe Beit Shan v'lo anshe Beit Haifa. They can't even lead the prayers. They can't lead the Amidah. V'lo anshe Tivonim, and not people of Tivon. Mipnei shekorin la'alfin ainin v'la'ainin alfin. Well, that would pretty much mean none of us could lead prayers today, because they're pronouncing the aleph like an ayin and an ayin like an aleph. Now, we learn in modern Hebrew and also in Ashkenazic pronunciation, the aleph and the ayin are both silent letters. But if you've ever heard a person, a Jew from an Arab country like Morocco or Yemen especially, pronounce the ayin, it's totally different from an aleph. It's made with the back of the throat, like ayin. It's so they're pronounced. They're not the same letter. The ayin sounds even more closer to like a chet. But here's another example of a pronunciation. The Gemara relates that Rabbi Chia once said to Rabbi Shimon, if you were a Levite, you would be disqualified from singing on the platform in the temple courtyard because your voice is thick. Basically, you got a lousy voice, buddy. And Rabbi Shimon, who was the son of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, was very hurt. And he mentioned it to his dad. And his dad said, well, you know what? Go back to him and tell him we wouldn't want you to daven, because when you reach the verse, I will wait upon the Lord, v'chikiti et Adonai, you would be a blasphemer, because you would be reciting v'hikiti. You don't pronounce your chet correctly. You pronounce it like a hey. And v'hikiti is I will strike the Lord, as opposed to v'chikiti, I will wait upon the Lord. So obviously there were different pronunciations. People pronounced Hebrew differently, and in some communities this was a real issue if they weren't pronouncing the letters properly.
We have to leave.
Okay.
So Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach. All right. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Well, you'll see
in your
us.
case, we'll see it, I guess, in a month.
After a while.
All right. Well, you can watch it on YouTube. I'll put it on our YouTube channel.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Okay. So Nate, I'll finish with you. We got a little more to go. Here we have an issue with eyes. A priest whose eyes are constantly running with tears. Zavlagan. It's obviously some kind of a condition that was also a distraction. But wait a minute. Then the Gemara says, wait, there was a certain priest. Hahu dehava b'shivavute. No, yeah. There was a priest in the neighborhood of Rav Huna. V'haya paris yadei. He would spread his hands, paris, he would spread his hands and recite the blessing, who had this condition. How come that was permitted? Well, it's because everybody knew him. So they were accustomed to seeing him and this whatever this eye issue was. So it didn't freak them out. They didn't think twice when he was doing the blessing. And then we also have a Baraita which teaches the same thing. Tanya nama hachi zav lagan lo yisa et kapav ve'im hayadash be'iro mutar. So a person with this eye condition would not be able to recite the priestly benediction if they were a priest, unless everybody knew him in town and they were used to seeing him that way. So that also is an opening to other types of deformities. If everybody knows the person, they're comfortable with the person because they see him all the time, not an issue. They're not going to be freaked out when they see the deformity of the person blessing. Rabbi Yochanan taught, Suma be'achat me'inav lo yisad kapav, a person with one eye, blind in one eye, may not say the priestly benediction. Again, the same response. Wait a minute. There was a priest in Rabbi Yochanan's own neighborhood who would do that and was blind in one eye. Oh, well, again, dash be'iro. He was known about town. People were used to seeing him. And there's a Baraita that teaches the exact same thing. And then Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Mi shehayu yadav tzevuot lo yisad kapav, a person whose hands are colored, again, they have dyed hands, should not say the priestly benediction. Again, because they're, that people are going to be looking at those colored hands. They're not going to be focused on the blessing. Tana im rov anshei ha'ir melachtan bechach mutar. But what about in the Baraita explains? Wait a minute. If most people in the town are dyers, so everybody's hands have multiple colors on them. They're just used to it. That's what they do. Then it's totally permissible. Nobody's going to think twice about seeing a priest whose hands are colored. Now, this last piece, I think I forgot to add this in the notes, so we'll just go on real quickly. This last piece here. Ha'omer eini over lifnei hateva betzvu'in. I will only daven in colored garments. May not pass before the ark to lead prayer. Af bilvanin lo ya'avor. Even if he says, I'm only going to pass before in white garments. And the concern here is that one who insists on wearing clothing of a specific color during his prayers is a heretic, or at least belongs to one of the non-rabbi Jewish groups during this period, and therefore we don't want them leading the service. Similarly, if they say "B'sandal eini over," I'm not wearing shoes, I'm not wearing my sandals, af yachef lo ya'avor, he may not pass before it even barefoot. And we'll so one explanation given. Well, we'll get to this in a moment. Let's finish the Mishnah. Ha'osei tfilato agula. Okay, so he makes this tefillin in a round shape. Ours are square, but he makes it round. So the Mishnah says sakana ve'ein ba mitzvah. One, it's dangerous, and two, it's not a mitzvah. That's not the mitzvah. You're not fulfilling the mitzvah because ours are square. Nitana al mitcho or al pas yado, if he put it on his forehead, or if he put it on his actual hand, the palm of his hand, right? Because the mitzvah says we put it between our eyes and on our hands. But we don't take it literally. We understand it to be the arm and in between the eyes, but at the forehead. But if a person tried to take it literally, then this is heretical. Basically, they're following a group that's taking these rules very literally, and there were Jewish groups. The Sadducees were one group, but there may have been other groups who took this verse really literally, and did it exactly as the verse states. You're putting it between your eyes, but that's not correct. That's not how we fulfill the mitzvah. Tzipan zahav unetana al beit unkali shalo. If he plated the phylacteries with gold, or he placed them on his arm outside of his sleeve. Understanding this term unkali, let's see the language here, meaning a short garment, like a short tunic with sleeves. According to this interpretation, one places his phylacteries, does not fulfill the mitzvah because he's placed it on the garment rather directly on the body. Some explain unkali is from the Greek, meaning the bend of the arm or the elbow. According to this, he's putting it on the wrong part of his arm. So it's not exactly clear what this is, but you're not doing it right. According to the traditional practice of the rabbis, they say this is the way of the outsiders. Again, these are groups outside of the rabbinic group, and that's not acceptable. All right, so now we'll finish up here what this means. What's the reason that one who wishes to pray only with white clothes or barefoot is not permitted to lead prayer? Because we think it might be heretical. Now, Rabbi Joshua Kolb's explanation is that the concern is there was a tension between groups. This may go back even during the Temple period, or it may be a response to post-Temple Judaism. Of course, the Mishnah is completed 150 some years after the temple was destroyed, that wearing white clothes, which was what the priests wore, or going barefoot, which is what the priests did in the temple, that there were some Jewish groups who may have said, this is appropriate in a post-temple world or in a synagogue. Even if the time during the temple period, that you're going to carry that practice of what's done in the temple into the synagogue, and that this was what the response is. It's the Mishnah is responding to that the synagogue outside the temple is different from inside the temple, and therefore you cannot wear white clothes or go barefoot. We don't do that. That's only inside the temple. And that it was a response to Jewish groups who were saying, "Oh no, we carry on these temple traditions," and here they're calling it minut, which is basically heretical groups or outsiders, people who are not part of the rabbinic class. Also, the same problem is with a person who's making his phylacteries in a round shape. What does that mean? So the Gemara's comment is, let us say that we already learned in this Mishnah that which the rabbis taught in a Baraita. The requirement that phylacteries must be square is a halakha transmitted to Moses from Sinai. So the Mishnah doesn't need to teach us that you can't wear round tefillin. We've already learned that it should be square. But Rava's explanation is square, and Rava continues to explain, yes, square means that you sew the tefillin, the beitim of the tefillin along the square seams. So therefore, it's pretty obvious, why do you need to teach us in this Mishnah you can't wear round tefillin when we already know that you can't wear, that tefillin are supposed to be square? And the response is from Rav Papa, it's possible to understand that the Mishnah is referring to phylacteries that one constructed to be round like a nut. So why would you have done this? Because the Mishnah doesn't indicate that they have to be square. It said that they can't be roundish, and they say it's a danger and it's not a mitzvah. And he's saying that they made it like a nut, so it wasn't exactly a round ball, but it was rounded corners. So therefore, they're explaining that even that's unacceptable. Now, again, Joshua Kulp explains that there's two concerns here. One, the sakana concern is that, and I think that was he exposes himself to danger. Rashi and others explain that if they were round and you bumped into something, it could cause an injury. If it was square, the force of the collision gets spread throughout the entire bottom, where if they were circular, the impact would be at a single point, and it would bump him right into his head. So that's one possibility. That's the sakana. The other is that why would you be trying to wear this differently shaped tefillin? Because it was a response to the persecutions during the Roman era, where Jews were not allowed to wear tefillin. And in this period of time, there were pious individuals who wore their tefillin all day long. It wasn't just when they daven; it was all day long. The reason we don't do that anymore is because you can't focus on pious concerns all day long, and that's what you should be. We should be. Our heads should be in the right space when we're wearing our tefillin. But so these individuals walking around town would try to get around this restriction, this prohibition by the Romans by making them a slightly different shape. But the Mishnah is telling us, one, it's probably not going to convince the Romans that you're not wearing tefillin, and two, that's not the way we make tefillin. So don't do it that way because it's still not kosher. Okay, so we've got it up to Daf 25. We'll pause here.
For the for some of the commentary that involved, it's not how we do things anymore as far as people who are blind and that sort of thing. For the Daf Yomi cycle, we're up to what is it? Yamaot, I think. And right now it has to do with a lot with betrothal and marriage and divorce even.
Okay.
And somebody had brought up there was a
Yivamot is what.
Yeah.
Okay.
Somebody had brought up an article relating to some of the protests in New York because they have another instance where it's reached another court where an Orthodox man is refusing to give a woman a get.
Yeah.
And so they're protesting that that the law itself doesn't specify, it creates this giant loophole for this to work.
Yeah.
And right now only California, and because it qualifies as a certain kind of abuse that isn't technically illegal. And right now only California and Hawaii have this on the books already.
Interesting.
And so there was protests about it in general, but also people rallying to have the state legislature put this in for this specific purpose. But it was somebody had made a comment because it had just in the DAF for that around then, this had come up, and the comment was like, well, it was a lot of, what would Hillel think about this, now, having made the argument where it was okay then, would he defend what's happening now, that sort of thing. So, and I think that we, when you look at, for this page in particular, how we're going to establish all these rules in a general sense, but then make the exception of normalcy. I'd like to think that as archaic as their thinking is, that there was a hope for something, because they're going to make all these sorts of rules, as far as the deformities or the hands or anything like that, they, no, they can't have it unless it was normal, in which case it's fine. So I'd like to think that there was this air of evolving thought even back then.
Oh, I think absolutely right. I think that and that's one of the claims that conservative Judaism has always made. In fact, in some ways it was established in this way, that there's a recognition that once you have a fixed text, right? The Bible tells you certain things, and then the rabbis come along with their oral interpretations and say, well, we do things, this is how we understand the verses in the Torah to mean. And then by keeping it oral, it's always flexible. Once you put it down on a text, now it becomes a fixed rule. And then, of course, the Gemara, again, in these academy discussions, interpret the fixed Mishnah text, but then that's written down. And that as long as you're having this constant interpretive tradition, you can continue to make interpretations. And conservative Judaism says we've lost, in our diasporan lifestyle, we've lost this, and we're trying to fit a cultural practices that were appropriate in a world where, in this case, women were, I don't want to say the property of men, but certainly the marriage is different in that world than it is in our world. Women there were no such things as independent women. Women were either daughters or wives, and if you weren't one of those two things, it was precarious for women. So therefore, Yes, marriage had a different meaning than it does to us today. In a world today where women are independent on their own, they can make their own living. They can, and of course, we marry for love, not just to procreate and to have more kids to work the fields. Um, we, marriage has a totally different meaning. It's not there aren't economic reasons for marriage the way they were in the past. So we have to, we have to be recognize that these rules were for a period of time where marriage was something different. Now it has to change, and if we follow those old rules, not only are they archaic, but they're abusive, and plenty in the Orthodox world take advantage horribly of these abusive opportunities. And the ultra-Orthodox leadership is always afraid of being innovative. So they won't make they won't make the changes necessary. The modern Orthodox world, I think, the way that the modern Orthodox world has dealt with it is signing documents at the point of the marriage itself, where basically the husband promises he will give a divorce in the case of a civil divorce in the society. Conservative rabbis use that too now. Conservative movement also were very free in using the rabbinic role of Afka'at Kedushin, where the rabbis, this is a little bit abusive power on the rabbinic part, but the rabbis can undo things in the past. So the money that you used, or what you used to create the marriage in the first place, we're now taking that away from you. So retroactively, we're undoing the wedding. It's basically an annulment, and it's not used all the time, but it is used in certain cases. Like I once had that, went to a sofer who does gets, because the woman wanted to remarry. The husband was abusive in the marriage, and to the extent that police had been called in to save her. So she broke out of that marriage. She got the divorce, and then he was being a jerk about it and wouldn't give her an official divorce, a get. Not that he cared, he wasn't a religious person, but he was just going to be nasty and not give her a get because he wanted her to suffer some more. And I went to a sofer who does gets, Jewish divorces, and I sent him all the police work and the divorce case, and he used that and said, yeah, this is enough to prove that he was an abusive husband, and therefore the initial marriage didn't take place. So that's another way that people have gotten out of it. It's not as good a solution as the other one, where now people just sign a document and say, if this marriage doesn't hold and it's a civil divorce, then I have to give, or I automatically give a get. It's kind of an automatic situation. So, but
I heard for time they will put like an outrageous financial thing that was like, if we have a civil divorce, for every day I don't get you a get, it's like $10,000 or something.
Yeah.
I heard that was a thing for a few years. Some rabbi had come up with that.
Right,
and they were going with them for a while.
Look, in the way the ultra-Orthodox world deals with it is that are some where they put a bad word out about the husband, and they say don't do business with them. They'll even have people come and beat the guy up.
I've heard about that one too.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's a good solution either, but there ought to be a better solution that just automatically that the woman, first of all, the solution should be in our world that the woman has a right to demand the get. It can't just be from the husband. It's that the woman has equal access to divorce court. That would be the best solution. But again, it's tough in the Orthodox world because they're very hesitant to make massive changes in Jewish law, but that's what you're seeing exactly in this. And there was a time in Jewish history where the rabbis were willing to say things change, culture changes, historical situations change, and we've got to amend or reinterpret. Really what they do is we just reinterpret the text to mean something that it didn't mean before this. And they had the freedom to do that. So they were much bolder than we are in our world. Anyway, all right. Well, this is good. All right, so we're not going to meet next week because it's Pesach, but we'll meet in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
No, we can't meet in 2 weeks because that's we just said that's the Geniza day. All right, so we're going to meet in 3 weeks.
Okay.
Right.
I'll send you an RSVP for the virtual Seder.
Okay, great. Well, you know what I decided? It was taken. Let me just stop the recording here.